Hello friends and welcome. I'm Sarah Liz and I have a fun technique to share with you today. We're going to make two cards that have this scene changing mechanism. I am using the Window with a View collection from Spellbinders for this, but you can do something really similar with products you already have. All right, so we're focusing today on the technique. Here's card number one. And I just think that this window die works beautifully for this. We're going to go from like an evening look out the window into this really bright and cheerful backyard scene. For my opening, I'm going to use the Vista view window, but you could use a rectangle instead. And then I've grabbed some clouds and this kite from the up in the air view die set. And then the tree with its sort of greenery and the kite are going to come from this backyard haven window. All of that I die cut ahead of time. And then I'll use the Coastal Escapes view on the second card. For this one, you could use a circle and then whatever sort of die cuts and scene you want to create in the background. You could use stamps instead of die cuts. Actually, it gets a little easier if you're using a stamped scene. I also wanted to mention the Botanical Solarium die set. I used just this potted plant on this emergency card. I actually think this is my favorite of all of the sets in that collection. So maybe worth checking out. I was feeling fancy, so we're doing just a little bit of ink blending, but mostly because that tree has some debossed detail and I really wanted that to stand out a little bit more. And then I'm using my Waffle Flower shader brushes to darken up the bottoms of these leaf clusters. I am kind of new to the Waffle Flower brushes and I've really been liking them lately. Part of what I love is that they come in, I think it's a 10 pack. You get a bunch of them. The price point's really good. And I have a bunch of these old cases from my Stampin' Up stamps and they fit perfectly in there without contaminating ink onto different brushes. I have one for each color family. To figure out the layout for my background panel, I am bringing in a window that I just cut from some scrap. And then I am going to put my tree down so I figure out where I want it. And I'm going to use this stencil. This stencil is bananas, you guys. It has clouds, it has a cityscape, it has grass and some mountains. And you can do all kinds of really great stuff. So I am just ink blending some grass onto my background panel. Then I will remove that. I did have to sort of mask off some of the places where there are other sort of pieces where there's holes in there. And then for the clouds, I actually want the puffy part of the cloud, okay? It's a teeny tiny piece, but I love that they gave you the leftovers from the stencil. I am just gonna tape this onto a piece of scrap cardstock to make it bigger, and I'm gonna leave it on there, okay? When I put it back in the packaging, it's gonna stay just like this. I'm gonna start on my scrap cardstock and pull lightly and gently upward to create a sort of cloudy scene in the background. This is also in that Window with a View collection. I like to kind of rotate this a little bit so I can get more looks. It doesn't look like it's just the same cloud line over and over and over again. And then when I get to the very bottom, I'll throw a little bit of blue ink kind of overlapping the grass. You're not going to see it on the grass, but it makes it look like I didn't just forget to finish the bottom. Then I'm going to take an A2 panel and I'm going to cut the base window out of that. And you can sort of see, right? It's going to fit my A2 panel. I'm going to use the inside piece just so I get a sense of where to build my scene. I'm tracing a pencil line about 1/4 inch away from that. For the most part, that's going to get covered up by the front panel of our card. But now when I go to lay down all the little pieces in my scene, I know where they need to be. I like to just sort of fiddle, right? I'm using the picture on the packaging as a guide. You can also go on the website. There are lots of people who have made cards using this set and you can use them as inspiration. I some days have it in me to come up with my own configuration and some days I don't. And that is okay. Once I get that tree laid out how I want, I'm going to put my sticky mat. This is just an Amazon guy. I'm going to lay it right into the corner of that panel and flip the whole thing over. My sticky mat is old. I've had it for a couple of years. It doesn't have a lot of sticky left. I will say I just cut up another piece of it. So I'm using a brand new piece right now and it's super sticky. So be aware of that if you like this, if you get the same mat. Then I put glue on my tree and I laid the panel onto the sticky mat instead of trying to flip the whole thing over again. and I will peel it away gently. I do have one piece that kind of moved on me when I was flipping things, so I just waited to add glue to him until I'd flipped the whole thing back over. And then this little piece, you couldn't see much of him when I had him upside down. So I'll add glue anywhere I need a little bit of extra business. Then I'm going to put this sun together. It's super cute, but in the end, I'm going to glue it to my card and then I'm going to change my mind. So you're going to see how I go about peeling things back up from my card. I do this a lot. It gets edited out of videos a lot of times, but I have, I think, 3 different videos this month coming out where I'm going to peel things back off my cards, and I've left it in all of those to kind of show you my process. The tire swing here just has 2 pieces, but if you didn't feel like layering up all that business, you don't have to. And then there's this little like rope. I don't need the whole thing, so I'm going to kind of hold it in place and trim it off where it hits the top of that branch. And then I'll add glue to the whole thing on thin little pieces like the rope on that tire swing. I just tap it off on the back of my hand to remove some of that glue so I don't have a big oozy mess. But certainly you could tap that off on some scrap paper if you prefer to do it that way. Here I'm deciding, I think I'd rather have the kite, and it's mostly because I wanted more color. It's worth noting that that kite very nearly cuts the 4 pieces separately, right? So if you wanted to make this so that all 4 of those quadrants are a different color, you could very easily do that. They're really just held together in a couple key places. But I liked this just fine, and I'm going to add the little kite string to it. I was forgetting at this point that I also can add color through the little kite tails, but then there's a bunch of flowers that you can put in this tree. So I'm going to go ahead and add the kite tails, and then I'll add the flowers, and there's some tiny little like individual leaves you can add onto the tree as well. I just put those in random spots here and there. For the centers of the flowers, I didn't feel like fiddling with the little die cut pieces, so I used these little Spellbinders gemstones with a sticky back. You could keep this simple and just have your front panel and then your window and kind of glue everything down, add a sentiment, and you're good to go. But I wanted to create this interactive something, okay? So what I'm going to do is ink blend onto some vellum. Your dye ink will dry on vellum, right? Just be aware that it does take a minute, or I'm going to hit mine with the heat tool. And then you're good to go. So I'm adding a deep purple, like a pinky purple, then royal blue, and then I'll add just a little bit of black, just a touch of black coming down from the bottom to darken that up, because it does get softer as you add it to the vellum, all right? I'm also holding up the frame of that window just to make sure I'm covering the entire piece. I'm going to die cut this out using that. Here I am with my heat tool. I just keep it moving. Like I move it really quickly. It didn't take very long. I'm going to cut off those top and bottom pieces because I had big splotches of ink that weren't dry, and I didn't want all that ink ending up on my die cutting plates. And then I'm going to tape this down and run it through my machine. To create my mechanism, I have a piece that's 3.5 by 6.5. It's way taller than I need. We'll cut it down later. And I'm going to go right in the middle, and I'm going to die cut out the window piece from the center of this. It does not cut the frame, okay? And so it's just going to cut out those different sort of squares that are empty in the middle of the window. If you don't have a window die, that's okay, right? You really could just use a rectangle that's going to slide in and out. So cut a slightly smaller one into that white panel. I'm going to layer up this gray window that I cut using both the frame and that inside piece, and I'm going to put it right on top of my vellum. Okay, so here's my sort of nighttime wash of color, and it's going to be sandwiched in between this die cut and then that slider piece, that white piece in the background. Again, you could just use a couple of nesting rectangles or nesting circles or squares or whatever you have, right? Cut a frame, one larger, one smaller, and we're going to sandwich them the same way. Use just the smaller one on that white piece, that big white piece, okay? So here now it's all connected. I have my nighttime vellum, my window, and then my slider mechanism. And I'm going to hold this up to my A2 panel, and I'm going to make some pencil lines. I'm making a tick mark about 1/4 inch above the top, And then I'm removing enough at the bottom that I can add a little foam tape that will act as a stopper. Okay. And so when I pulled it away the first time, I was like, oh, I have more room. So I'm going to stick it back in there and make another line. I'm putting the same mark on that background purple panel because that will really help me when I go to line things up later. I'm going to stick it in my trimmer and I will trim off both of those top and bottom pieces, the excess pieces. It's much easier to start with a piece that's way too big than to try to get it perfectly and try to line up the window with the hole in your A2. Like, that's just a mess. Don't do that. That's harder. Okay, so this is the Papercrafting Magic Stamp Set, and there's a stamp that says pull, and I'm going to stamp that at the very top. Now, this is going to make my card a little bigger than A2, but I don't really care, right? I'll put it in an A6 envelope or I'll hand deliver it. Not a problem. But certainly you could cut down the A2 panel to be just a little bit smaller so that everything would fit into the envelope. I used my white slider mechanism to add some 1mm foam tape just around the 3 sides. But I'm also going to add some acetate because there's a ton of texture in the background. And if I'm trying to slide something in and out of there with that tree, it's going to get caught. Right? That catch point is going to tear my tree apart. If you were stamping your background, you wouldn't have to do this step. I'm going to stamp on my acetate. So I have lined up all 3 layers in my MISTI just to get my placement right. And then I'll remove all the cardstock layers so I have just the acetate. I'm using Black StazOn ink here. You need a solvent-based ink that will dry on that acetate. This works really well, though I do find I need to get it in one stamp. If I try to double stamp it, it's not going to work real well. This one says, "Let the fun begin." It's from the Monster Birthday Sentiments that came out a little while ago. And then I'm just going to double check my placement, make sure everything looks good, and I can start assembling things. I'm removing the foam tape from my purple panel, and then I'm going to bring in my scoreboard. Okay, I want to make sure that I get this lined up just perfectly in the corner. And so here it is, it's in my scoreboard and I have it upside down. So I also have my acetate upside down and I will tuck them both right into the corner. And then I know that everything's going to fit perfectly. I added a little wet glue. If I was going to do it again, I would skip that step. Then I added more foam tape on top of the acetate, right? Because there is dimension from all of my layers of cardstock in the background, and that just creates a little room for me there. You could add foam tape at the top of that panel as well. I probably would do that if I made this card again, just so that it's really clear which slot my white slider piece is going to go into. There's a little, I don't know what these are called, like a window box for some flowers that can go on the front of this window. And I thought we needed more color, a little more interest on the front. So I'm going to go ahead and add that. I'm layering up the 2 pieces. I just used some pattern paper for that pink and white layer, and I think it's really cute. I'm figuring out where it goes on my card, and then I'm sort of flipping it like a hinge because there aren't a lot of places where I can put the glue here. All the way down at the very, very bottom, and then the 2 top corners, right? The left and right corners. And then I'm immediately going to pull that white piece out of there to make sure I don't glue anything shut. Then I decided, hey, I think this needs some greenery. You guys, this does make it trickier to put that slider piece back in, but I thought it was worth it. So I just added a little bit of double-sided tape and I'm going to slide it back there and press it down, and no wet glue at this point because I'm afraid of gluing everything shut. You can see me, like I have to press down a little bit on the acetate, but it does go in just fine. And then I'm going to add this happy birthday. It's from the Sunday Drive stamp set that I use all the time. You guys have seen it a million times. And I just framed that out and I'm going to glue it only to the lavender part of the cardstock. Otherwise, I'm going to glue my card shut. And this slides out and reveals this fun, let the fun begin. I like how the 2 sentiments stack one on top of the other. We're going to make another card, and this one, I've already done a bunch of this small die cut assembly, right? This is really, again, about the technique. So here's how this one works, and it's a little simpler. There weren't as many layers of die cut pieces in the background, so I didn't need that second layer of acetate, and I'm not creating that sort of nighttime to daytime. I just have 2 separate scenes. So this is the Coastal Escape Views, and it has the fish and the palm tree, the water, the sand, all of those things. I cut 3 pieces of acetate, but I'm only going to use 1. So ignore the fact that I went a little crazy with my die cutting machine. I am adding a piece of cardstock to my background that is 3/4 of an inch smaller than my A2 panel. Okay, so it's 3.5 by 4 3/4. And then I'm going to glue my largest circle onto the background. Again, I'm using the circles that come in that set, but use whatever circles you have. Create a scene of whatever kind you want, or just put a critter in there. Like, you don't even have to create a whole scene. Okay. Then I am cutting this extra piece. I just used some of my random circle dies to do this because there are little holes in like the porthole cover, and I didn't want the foam tape to show through that. Okay, so this little navy piece you only would need if you're using this particular set. If you have just circle dies, then go ahead and nest 2 of them together, right? And cut it so that you're going to get a frame. I am adding acetate behind that frame to make it sturdier. I actually use shrink film, like Shrinky Dink kind of. It's heavier and it makes it really, really sturdy. This scene, this with the fish, is exactly the same size as that acetate window. So I wanted it to be a little bit bigger. It'll help it sit in there when you're pulling it in and out. So I cut another circle that's ever so slightly larger, and I'm going to make a pull tab. This is 1 inch wide by, longer. And then I am using, this is the 1-2 punch from Spellbinders. It just came out. It will round your corners. And then there's also a little like cut out piece that you can use for making envelopes. It's super fancy. But I'm just rounding corners today. And then I'm going to stamp pull in some silver ink. I want it to be pretty subtle. I'm going to do a few practice stamps, and then I will stamp it right at the top. And I'm going to hold my circle over the top and then my frame and make sure that everything kind of looks the way it's supposed to. I need that pull to come out over the top of the frame. And then I'm going to clip it at the bottom so that it's hiding behind the bottom of the circle. And then I'll just glue it back behind there. I put a little pencil mark to remind myself of where I had it lined up. And then I'm actually going to add another circle behind that one to kind of hide my wonky frame, right? This is sort of the redneck version of let's make a pull tab, but I'm going to cover it up and then no one will ever know. I want my frame to have one of the circle cutouts at the very top center. So I put a little bit of mint tape there just so I could keep track of it from the back. And then this is the new 3mm foam strips from scrapbook.com, right? Most foam is like 2mm. So this is extra thick and it's perfect for this. Perfect, perfect, perfect. And I am going to put that only on the bottom half. If you go any higher than that, you're going to end up with a slider piece that won't actually slide in and out. And then I'm going to attach that to my card, right? You could do this with any shape. And if it wasn't a circle, you could actually pull that foam up a little bit higher. It's just, if you keep going up higher on the circle, right, all of a sudden you're enclosing that sort of scene that pulls in and out. I'm going to go ahead and stamp a sentiment from the coordinating stamp set that came out with this set. It's called Sending Sunshine Sentiments, and there's a lot of really sweet sentiments in here. But I wasn't sure which one I was actually going to want on this card later on. So I've stamped it in some Twilight pigment ink. It says, let's have an adventure. I'm going to heat emboss that just because that ink takes a little while to dry. I'll trim it out and put it on essentially what looks like an emergency sentiment strip. Okay. And I'm going to attach this temporarily, and I'm going to pop it up with foam. So this you can sort of apply to any card where you're stamping a sentiment and you're like, I'm not sure I'm going to want this one, right? So I have added some foam tape to the back of a blank navy piece of cardstock. That strip is ever so slightly smaller than the one behind Let's Have an Adventure. And then I can add my sentiment with removable adhesive. So if later on I'm like, you know what, I just want to turn this into like a birthday card, I can easily do that. And I am not locked into using this one sentiment later on. And I'm not scrambling last minute to make a birthday card for someone who needs something really special. And here you can see our card complete. It pulls in and out really, really easily. Again, you can do this with any shape dies you have, any nesting shape dies you have. So those are our 2 cards for today. I would love to know which of these 2 cards is your favorite. And I really hope that you'll give this a try. Use the products that you have. I just think it's such a fun surprise. You could do this with ephemera, with stamps, anything you have. Thank you so much for spending your time with me, and I will see you next time.